Hi folks, with Tacitus Today, your pushback channel. Thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the activist judges all over the Western world, actually, but focusing on the United States in this instance, and look at the lawfare tactics to harass and delay and just try and generally fuck up the Trump administration. Now, I noticed in a one of the judgments, the recent, I think it was about gay people, LGBTQ in the military, or trans in the military, one of those things, and a matter of days just before the order was to take effect, this activist group that seems remarkably well funded, and their funding needs to be cut off, I think, but an activist group representing trans, some NGO representing trans people or purporting to represent trans people, managed to find an activist judge, which wouldn't be hard. There's got to be 300 plus activist judges in the United States at some middle or senior level, district court type level. So this activist group goes to the judge just days before the things to come, I think 2 days before the orders to come into effect, and puts up a case saying that, and I'll paraphrase it here, but a case saying that this will discriminate against trans people, and as trans people are historically marginalized group in society, that they must be, the law cannot discriminate against in any way, be it directly, indirectly, or at any form of, even on the tangent. And therefore the judge has to put a stay on the I think it was an executive order from the president. The judge has to put a stay on the order. Now, this isn't a court hearing as in both parties get to put their case, or everyone argues the merits of something. This is an activist group, externally funded by an activist source of funding, goes to an activist judge who is surrounded by activist apparatchiks and operatives, and is plugged in tightly to the activist cabal. And so it's like a preset move here. And just a couple of days before the orders to come into effect, they get this injunction placed. But it's only one side. So the activist group says, it's going to marginalize these people who are marginalized. It's going to discriminate against this marginalized group. Now, do they have to prove that discrimination is going to happen? Do they have to prove that it is a marginalized group? Do they, by what standards, by what definition? They're not required to meet the high bar of they just have to allege it. And if you look at the documents, or what's available publicly anyway, if you look at the documents they've lodged, it's incredibly vague. It could be a first year gender studies student at some fourth tier college, who put that together. It's clumsy, it's poorly worded, it's shoddy, sloppy work, and that's presented to the judge, and the judge goes, "Yep, I'm putting an injunction on there." Now, the judge, in my opinion, if you're going to uphold the law, which is the judge's job, they've taken an oath of office, the judge should be saying, "Okay, well, that's interesting. I want to get the other side in here, the government in this case, to present their case or present their arguments or present their legal documents and their definitions and so on. And then I'll hear the case and then I'll give a verdict." But the activists say, no, it's too urgent. It's too urgent. The executive order from the president is going to come into effect in 2 or 3 days' time. So you have to make that decision now to put the injunction in. Now, if I was a judge, I'd say, well, why didn't you bring your case to me earlier? Why wait until just before the orders? It's a tactic to fuck up Trump. So the judge should be asking that question. No, I'm not going to give you an injunction. You could have put this in weeks ago. Why didn't you do it then? Why wait till the last minute? No, you're not going to get an injunction. I'll call a hearing in 2 weeks' time, and I'll hear the evidence and decide. But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about activist judge, activist court officials, activist administrators, activist NGO, activist funding, and the whole thing is an activist conga line. And so the judge is able to do this. Now, what was interesting in the judge's order was they didn't rely on the law. The law, I mean, it's a fucking judge in the court. You'd think the law might have carry some weight, but it doesn't anymore. And I'll come to the point of this in just a moment. But in the judge's decision to put the injunction on, they referred consistently to this historically marginalised communities. It will discriminate or affect or negatively affect historically marginalised communities, and therefore I'm putting the injunction on there. What evidence or proof do they have? Well, none. A marginalised community, what's the definition? What's the legal definition of that? Is there any? Well, no. Is there a definition that given that everyone has to meet the same bar of fitness and capability, that can't by definition discriminate, because everybody has to meet that standard. Anybody who wants to serve has to meet that standard. So how can that be discriminatory? Well, it has to be a lower bar for people, a much lower bar for people who are historically marginalised. Therefore, So we're talking about affirmative action and DEI and all that sort of stuff here. But the judge makes, and now I went on the basis of that, this will affect or negatively affect historically marginalised communities. And just using that phrase, that term, I went and looked at other judges, just random. I wasn't going through it sort of one by one, just randomly, whether it be judges in Washington, whether it be DC, whether it be judges in Boston or California, anywhere, and that have been placing injunctions against the Trump administration, and that term crops up pretty much all the time. So we don't need to guess, or this is a coordinated effort across the United States. Judge Boasberg, all these sort of things, that using these terms that do not have legal definition and which is not within the law. I can prevent the government doing it because it may affect historically marginalised people. Historically, how? In what way? Oh, well, we're talking slavery from 200 years ago. Well, hold on a minute. By that definition, anybody is marginalised. You can't do anything that might upset white people because they've been marginalised. Oh, yeah. What about the Barbary slave trade? Oh, that's right. And so, by playing this silly ideological bullshit game that children can do it, student politics in some left-wing bullshit university, they can play that game, but not serious people who've been appointed to do a serious job. Now, as I go through all the judges that are making these decisions, they all, there's a few exceptions, but they pretty much all come from these historically marginalised communities, or perceive themselves to. So they're Black, they're Mexican or Hispanic, they're many of them, by the way, not even born in the United States. Whether it be Tanya Chutkan, who's throwing January 6 people in prison with scant regard, in my opinion, scant regard to the law, or Boasberg, or any of these. They all come from, well, pretty much, not every single one, but pretty much all come from these so-called marginalised communities. They're gay, they're lesbian, they're Black, they're Hispanic, they're whatever, Asian, and they believe they have a mission to impose ideological social justice, radical ideas on the justice system. Are they bound by the law? Yeah, well, if I feel like it. And this is outrageous. Given that some of these judges are elected in very blue districts, and they're heavily funded and supported by activist NGO groups that want to put them in there, and then they form part of these NGO activist networks. And the Department of Justice in the US has really got to go after these people and their funding and so on. Look at all their communications. I'd bet 100% with surety that judge that made that order, the injunction against, or any of these other injunctions against the Trump administration, if their communications of them and or their immediate administrative assistants are looked at, they'll see an absolute torrent of back and forth communications with these radical activist groups as the whole thing is set up. And how is it that with the orders due to come into force on Monday morning, that on Saturday night at midnight, the activist group comes along with a demand for an injunction. And hey, wouldn't you believe it? The most insane activist, ideological, fanatic judge happens to be on duty that day, just as the activist group comes in with a demand for an injunction. And sometimes these junctions are granted within 15 minutes. I mean, can you even read the documents in that time at midnight? I mean, are you kidding me? So clearly this is a prearranged scam, legal scam. It's a prearranged scam, and it needs to be shut down urgently. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.